What's up guys, it's Nora and I'm here today because it is Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. Every year, December 1st through 7th is Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. I wanted to share some videos with you guys specifically about my IBD and my experiences with it. In this video, I'm going to share with you guys specifically what it was like for me to get diagnosed, because my diagnosis story is pretty unique and unheard of to most people because I was diagnosed at such an early age. I mean, I'm a part of some Facebook groups, just support groups, and I still, to this point, every single time someone asks, remain in all my groups to be the youngest person diagnosed. And mind you, I also showed symptoms since birth. So let's get right into the video. When I was born, we have to remember the time period that I was born in because things were way different than nowadays. Nowadays, there's a lot more research, there's a lot more known, there's a lot more cases and a lot more awareness for it. But when I was born in 98, there was a lot more known about Crohn's disease, and there seems to be a lot more still to this day known about Crohn's disease compared to colitis. I showed symptoms since birth. I was labeled as a colicky baby. Nobody knew what the problem was, so my mom did like the classic of what moms are supposed to do when they have colicky babies, which is kind of limit the diet, change up the diet, see what they can do. I was breastfed, but I still was having stomach problems, especially when foods were introduced. So my mom, she still to this day actually has a diary of everything that I was eating at one time because the doctor wanted to know exactly what I was having. He wanted to know exactly what my stools were looking like. My mom has all of that information. We still struggled. I went to babysitters. My babysitters had diaries of my symptoms. I mean, I had straight like liquid blood coming out of my diaper, and no one could figure out why, because back then, I mean, colitis kind of had that stereotypical you're diagnosed when you're 60 or 50. So it wasn't known that anybody of my age had colitis, and I'm sure someone did out there, but it was very, very uncommon, unheard of, and no one went down that like thought process, especially even for Crohn's. Like, a lot of people are diagnosed with Crohn's now 5+ and up. More commonly, I believe the most common is during your teenage years, so around the age of 15. But when I was diagnosed, none of that like existed. There wasn't a ton of research and a ton of knowledge on a young child like me having ulcerative colitis. Back to this story. Anyway, I was having straight diarrhea and straight blood come out of my diaper every single time people were changing me. My mom had me sent for like barium swallow tests and like x-rays, and they still could not figure out what it was. They changed up my diet a bunch, and I had problems, and then finally when I was 3 years old, they said enough of this. I was very malnourished, very anemic. I was failure to thrive. I was a very sick kid. I mean, every single picture when I'm younger, like I have bags under my eyes because of how sick I was, and they decided to scope me and do a biopsy. So I did just a colonoscopy. Nowadays, I do colonoscopy endoscopies just to check to see if I have Crohn's disease or anything else going on. When they did the biopsy, they also had me do like the Prometheus test, which I think back then had more false positives and negatives. I don't think it was as reliable. And the thing with Prometheus is it's a blood test, by the way, if people don't know. It can say what it most likely believes you're diagnosed with, but there's always a chance of it being the opposite. So it did come back and said I had colitis, but there's always that chance, and there's a decent chance, not just like a small chance, there's a decent chance that it may diagnose you wrong and you may in fact have Crohn's. We were doing like stool tests like calprotectin, we were doing my sed rate, we were doing any test under the sun, and finally they just said fine, we'll do the colonoscopy. They biopsied me. I had colitis, and I was labeled as a VEO, which is a very early onset diagnosis. And what that pretty much means is that very rare. I'm in like a special category because I was diagnosed so early on. I mean, when I tell people who actually have an idea of what IBD is and colitis, they're like, that's really weird, and it's unique. But it also puts me at a lot more risks than everybody else who is diagnosed later on in life. Like, I'm at a high risk of having Crohn's disease. This past year, I was scoped in, I believe, March. Yeah, I was scoped spring break of March 2020, and everything looked good, and they needed to do that to prove that my Remicade was still working. And then I had symptoms of Crohn's disease, and I'm not going to go into the details of those specific symptoms, but I had symptoms specific to Crohn's disease throughout March to kind of the beginning of October actually, and I was going and having to get treated for other things. I am at a risk of having Crohn's disease much higher than other people because I was diagnosed so early on, because I was having these symptoms specific to Crohn's disease. My doctor didn't really want to pursue a diagnosis of Crohn's or go through another colonoscopy and endoscopy because I literally had just had one. But I mean, regardless, in her words, you treat it the same. I'm at biologics right now. If I was still taking pills and kind of in that category of medication, some of the pills are different for those who have Crohn's disease. You just treat it a little bit different with those. But when you get to biologics, treatment is pretty much the same. In hindsight, I may have Crohn's disease. I may have had Crohn's this entire time and it's just laid dormant and presented as colitis, and we just don't know. I suspect there's been 2 or 3 times that I definitely have questioned whether I had Crohn's disease my sophomore year after I was hospitalized, because I flared differently. Like I said in my other video, I flared very quickly, which was not like that for me. And when they did my colonoscopy, instead of there being inflammation in like the 2 normal spots, my entire colon was inflamed, which is again kind of not normal for my usual disease presentation. So I went in for an MRE to check to see if I had Crohn's, and they said no at the time. But again, I always have that risk of developing Crohn's, which, like my doctor said, again, treatment is practically the same where I'm at with my medication and what the medications available that I haven't failed are. Pretty much another diagnosis would just mean that I'm at more risk for things, and there's more things to just look out for. Now that could be like risk after surgery or just risk for me developing other problems. Like people with Crohn's more commonly they have fissures, they have more bowel obstructions, they have more of the abscesses, they have more, I believe, adhesions to other organs. But that is the big difference between the two. And in the future, again, maybe I might get diagnosed with Crohn's. Maybe I'll always be diagnosed with colitis. Who knows? But that was the story of how I originally was diagnosed. After I was finally diagnosed with colitis, they put me on probiotics, and they put me, I always, when I flare, do a burst of prednisone. Not a burst, like a long-term amount of prednisone. I was put on prednisone, probiotics, as well as sulfasalazine. Now I am allergic to sulfasalazine. 11 years after that, I became allergic to it. In the moment, the sulfasalazine seemed to work for me, although within those 11 years that I was on it, I still flared, which makes me question as to whether I actually was ever like really truly healthy on it, because I did flare in between then. Since I've been on my Remicade, I haven't flared, but you never know if a biologic is working until it's not, because you can't look at me and go, oh, she was almost in a flare, but then the Remicade kept it at bay, if that makes sense, because there's no evidence to show that. So you only know it's working until it doesn't. And so far, I haven't flared on it, besides having those weird Crohn's symptoms, which maybe is an indicator that the Remicade isn't working. I don't know. Up until now, I still have colitis. I'm still going and living life. I've had no surgeries or anything. I've only done medications, and I hope to keep it that way. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my video and found it maybe a little educational. Maybe you learned from it. Maybe you've experienced something similar, or maybe this was just a good eye-opener for you. Who knows? But I'll see you guys next time.